They laughed when the cleaning lady asked to see the reactor diagnostics. "Ma'am, this isn't a museum tour." Lieutenant Bradley Hutchinson smirked, his voice carrying across the control room loud enough for everyone to hear. But when she rattled off technical specifications that weren't in any manual, the laughter stopped. Because what they didn't know was who she used to be. Doctor. Rebecca Ann Morrison pushed her maintenance cart through the sterile corridors of Naval Submarine Base Kings Bay at 5:47 a.m., just as she had every morning for the past 2 years. The ID badge clipped to her faded blue uniform read R. Morrison, Environmental Services, and to every sailor, officer, and civilian contractor who passed her, that's all she was. A middle-aged cleaning woman with calloused hands and tired eyes who emptied trash bins and mopped floors in America's most sensitive nuclear facility. They had no idea they were walking past Dr. Rebecca Ann Brennan Morrison, former chief nuclear engineer for the Atlantic submarine fleet, the woman who had designed the emergency cooling protocols for the Ohio-class submarines docked just beyond these walls, the same woman who had been destroyed 3 years ago for refusing to stay silent about a cover-up that could have killed thousands. Rebecca was 41 now, her dark hair streaked with premature gray from stress and sleepless nights. Her wedding ring had been pawned 18 months ago to pay rent on the one-bedroom apartment she shared with her 8-year-old daughter, Emma. The Navy pension she should have received was gone, along with her security clearance, her career, and her reputation. All because she had discovered that Captain Marcus Delacroix was falsifying safety reports to hide cost overruns in a $2 billion reactor modernization program. When she'd blown the whistle, Delacroix had painted her as mentally unstable. Post-deployment stress, the official report had said. Paranoid delusions about reactor safety. Within 6 months, she was unemployable in any nuclear field, blacklisted from positions she was overqualified for, watching her life savings disappear while fighting legal battles she couldn't win. The custodial job at Kings Bay had been a desperate move. She'd applied under her maiden name with forged employment history, claiming to be a former hotel housekeeper from Savannah. The background check had been cursory. Who investigates the cleaning staff? But Rebecca had chosen this base deliberately. She knew that sooner or later the problems she'd warned about would surface. When they did, she would be here. That moment came at 6:23 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. That would change everything. Emergency to submarine operations! All senior staff to the control room immediately. The announcement echoed through the corridors as Rebecca was cleaning the administrative wing. She had heard that tone before. Controlled urgency that meant something catastrophic was happening. Rebecca abandoned her cart and moved quickly toward the Submarine Operations Center, her heart pounding with a mixture of dread and grim vindication. She knew these corridors better than most of the personnel who worked here. During her time as chief nuclear engineer, she had spent countless hours in these buildings, reviewing safety protocols and emergency procedures. Through the control room's reinforced glass windows, she could see controlled chaos erupting inside. Commander Jessica Chen, the base executive officer, was coordinating with multiple personnel while staring at banks of monitors displaying reactor telemetry. Rebecca positioned herself outside the room, ostensibly cleaning the hallway while listening to every word. The USS Nebraska's reactor compartment is showing temperature spikes of 60 degrees above normal parameters, Commander Chen was saying to someone on a secure phone. Automated cooling systems are not responding to remote commands, and we're getting conflicting readings from multiple sensor arrays. Rebecca's blood turned to ice. The Nebraska was one of the newest submarines in the fleet, carrying enough nuclear firepower to level entire countries. If its reactor was malfunctioning, they weren't just facing a potential accident. They were looking at a possible radiological disaster that could contaminate the entire Georgia coast. At 7:15 a.m., Admiral William Prescott arrived via emergency helicopter from Norfolk, his weathered face showing the strain of a man who understood exactly how grave this situation had become. Rebecca watched through the glass as he took command of the crisis response, his voice cutting through the chaos with military precision. "Status report. How long before we hit critical thresholds?" Dr. Elizabeth Hartwell, the Navy's current chief nuclear engineer, Rebecca's replacement, looked exhausted despite the early hour. "Sir, if current temperature trends continue, we're looking at potential steam explosion in the reactor compartment within 8 hours. The cooling systems appear to be malfunctioning, but we can't determine why." Options for manual intervention? "We'd have to send personnel into the reactor compartment. With current radiation levels, it would be a death sentence." Rebecca studied the data displays visible through the window, her trained eye immediately identifying patterns that the current team was missing. The problem wasn't mechanical failure, it was a software integration issue. Someone had updated the submarine's control systems without properly testing compatibility with the older cooling hardware. The new programs were sending contradictory signals to the pumps, creating an oscillating pattern that was actually amplifying the heating instead of controlling it. At 8:45 a.m., the situation deteriorated rapidly. Lieutenant Hutchinson was coordinating with multiple technical teams, while the reactor temperature climbed past the red line into territory that made everyone in the room visibly nervous. "Sir, we've tried every standard protocol," Dr. Hartwell reported, her voice cracking slightly. "The control systems are responding to commands, but the cooling pumps are operating in a pattern that's making the problem worse. It's like they're fighting each other." That's exactly what they're doing, Rebecca thought. She recognized the signature of the problem because she had warned about this exact scenario 3 years ago. The new control software assumed hardware capabilities that the older submarines didn't possess, creating feedback loops that could turn cooling systems into heating systems. Rebecca made her decision. She couldn't stand by and watch preventable disaster unfold, regardless of the personal cost. Her daughter's face flashed through her mind. Emma, sleeping peacefully in their small apartment, trusting that Mommy would come home safely from her cleaning job. If this reactor melted down, Emma might not have a home to come back to. She walked directly to the control room's security door and knocked firmly. Lieutenant Hutchinson appeared, looking harried and impatient. "Ma'am, this area is restricted during emergency operations. I need to speak with Admiral Prescott," Rebecca said clearly. "About the Nebraska's reactor." Hutchinson blinked in surprise. "Ma'am, I don't think you understand. The problem isn't mechanical," Rebecca continued, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent decades in crisis situations. "You're dealing with a software integration conflict between the new control interface and the legacy cooling system hardware. The pumps are receiving contradictory signals and creating an oscillating pattern that's amplifying thermal buildup instead of controlling it." The room fell silent. Every head turned toward the cleaning woman who had just described their crisis with technical precision that none of them possessed. Admiral Prescott studied her with sharp, calculating eyes. "Who are you?" he asked quietly. Rebecca met his gaze steadily, knowing that her next words would either save lives or destroy what little remained of hers. "Dr. Rebecca Ann Brennan Morrison, former Chief Nuclear Engineer, Atlantic Submarine Fleet. And I know how to fix this because I warned you this would happen 3 years ago." The silence in the control room was deafening. Admiral Prescott's eyes never left Rebecca's face, as the weight of her words settled over the room like fallout. Dr. Elizabeth Hartwell's face had drained of color, her hands trembling slightly as she stared at the woman she thought was just a janitor. Lieutenant Hutchinson stood frozen in the doorway, his mouth hanging open in disbelief. "Brennan Morrison," Admiral Prescott repeated slowly, his voice cutting through the tension. "The engineer who tried to torpedo the modernization program with false safety claims." Rebecca felt the familiar stab of injustice pierce her chest, but she kept her voice steady. "The engineer who identified critical flaws that you're dealing with right now, sir. While you still have time to prevent a catastrophe." Commander Chen stepped forward, her face a mask of controlled anger. "Security, remove this woman immediately. She's clearly—" "Ma'am, respectfully," Rebecca interrupted, pointing to the main display showing the Nebraska's reactor readings. "You have maybe 6 hours before that reactor reaches steam explosion threshold. The temperature is climbing in a perfect sine wave pattern every 14 minutes. That's not random. That's a software loop conflict." Dr. Hartwell moved closer to the displays, studying the data patterns Rebecca had pointed out. Her face went pale as she traced the temperature curves with her finger. "Oh my God," she whispered. "She's right. Look at the oscillation pattern. It's not random system failure. It's systematic." Admiral Prescott held up a hand, silencing the room. "Dr. Brennan Morrison, you have 30 seconds to convince me you're not wasting precious time. Because if that submarine melts down, we're looking at a radiological disaster that will make Chernobyl look like a minor accident." Rebecca stepped closer to the command console, her custodial uniform suddenly feeling like a costume she was ready to shed. Odile uniform suddenly feeling like a costume she was ready to shed. 3 years ago, I warned Captain Delacroix that integrating the new Aegis 7 control software with legacy submarine hardware would create exactly this scenario. The new system sends cooling commands every 12 seconds. The old hardware needs 18 seconds to complete each cycle. You get a cascade effect. The system fights itself. That's exactly what we're seeing," Dr. Hartwell admitted reluctantly. "But the integration was tested extensively." "In simulations," Rebecca cut her off, "on new-build submarines with compatible hardware. The Nebraska was retrofitted with older cooling pumps that couldn't handle the command frequency. I documented this in a 40-page technical analysis that was buried along with my career." Lieutenant Hutchinson was frantically typing at his workstation. "Admiral, I'm pulling up personnel records now. Dr. Rebecca Brennan Morrison, formerly Dr. Rebecca Ann Brennan. MIT doctoral program, summa cum laude. 12 years naval service, specialized in reactor safety protocols. Former chief nuclear engineer for—" He stopped mid-sentence, his face going ashen. "Sir, she designed most of the safety systems currently in use across the submarine fleet." The room erupted in urgent whispers. Rebecca could feel the shift in atmosphere, skepticism giving way to desperate hope. But she also knew that admitting she was right meant admitting that powerful people had made catastrophic mistakes. At 9:15 a.m., the reactor temperature spiked again, climbing past 850 degrees Fahrenheit. The automated alarms began wailing, and Rebecca could see genuine fear in the faces around her. These were capable people, but they were dealing with a problem beyond their expertise. "Dr. Brennan Morrison," Admiral Prescott said formally, his voice carrying the weight of command. "If you're correct about the cause, do you know how to fix it?" Rebecca nodded, feeling the familiar surge of clarity that came with critical technical challenges. "We need to manually override the AEGIS-7 system and revert to legacy cooling protocols. But it requires someone to physically access the submarine's reactor compartment control panel, someone who knows exactly which systems to isolate and in what sequence." The radiation levels, Dr. Hartwell began, are manageable for short-term exposure if you know what you're doing, Rebecca finished. I've been in reactor compartments during emergency procedures before. The key is speed and precision. Commander Chen stepped forward, her expression skeptical. Dr. Brennan Morrison, with all due respect, you've been working as a janitor for 2 years. Are you certain your technical knowledge is still current? Rebecca almost smiled at the irony. Ma'am, I've spent the last 2 years cleaning these facilities. I know every modification, every upgrade, every system change that's been implemented. I've watched the modernization program from the ground level, and I've seen exactly how the new software integrates with existing infrastructure. At 9:47 a.m., Captain Marcus Delacroix arrived from the Pentagon via emergency helicopter. Rebecca's heart clenched as she watched her former supervisor stride into the control room, his silver hair immaculate, his uniform bearing ribbons that included commendations for the very program that had destroyed her career. Delacroix's eyes swept the room before settling on Rebecca with a mixture of shock and anger. "What is she doing here?" he demanded. "Captain Delacroix," Admiral Prescott said coldly, "Dr. Brennan Morrison has identified the source of our reactor problem. It appears to be related to software integration issues she raised 3 years ago." Delacroix's face hardened. "Admiral, this woman is mentally unstable. She was removed from the program due to psychological concerns and conspiracy theories about reactor safety. Her presence here during a crisis is highly inappropriate and potentially dangerous." Rebecca felt the room's energy shift again. The doubt was creeping back in, fed by Delacroix's authoritative presence and his calculated destruction of her credibility. She could see Dr. Hartwell wavering, Commander Chen's suspicion returning. But then Emma's face flashed through her mind again. Her little girl, who still believed her mommy was the smartest person in the world, who didn't understand why they'd had to move to a smaller apartment, why mommy cried sometimes when she thought Emma was asleep, why there was never enough money for new clothes or toys. Rebecca squared her shoulders and met Delacroix's gaze directly. "Captain, I have a question for you. On March 15th, 2021, during the integration testing phase, did you receive my technical analysis regarding Aegis 7 software timing conflicts with legacy hardware?" Delacroix's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "I receive hundreds of technical documents. This one was 40 pages and marked critical safety concern," Rebecca continued relentlessly. "It specifically warned about cascade failures in submarines with pre-2018 cooling systems. Did you forward that analysis to the integration team?" The control room had gone completely silent except for the persistent alarm from the Nebraska's reactor monitors. Everyone was watching the confrontation between the disgraced engineer and the decorated captain who had destroyed her. "I evaluated your concerns," Delacroix said carefully, "and determined they were based on overly conservative projections that would have unnecessarily delayed a critical defense program." "Conservative projections," Rebecca repeated, her voice carrying a bitter edge. "Is that what you call predicting exactly what's happening right now?" At 10:23 a.m., another temperature spike sent the reactor readings into the red zone. The Nebraska's automated emergency protocols were beginning to fail, and radiation alarms were going off throughout the submarine. Time was running out, and everyone in the room knew it. Admiral Prescott made his decision. "Dr. Brennan Morrison, I'm authorizing you to attempt the manual override, but I need to know, can you guarantee this will work?" Rebecca looked around the room at the faces staring at her. Hope, fear, desperation, and in Delacroix's case, barely concealed fury. She thought about Emma, about the life they'd lost, and the life they might still have if she could prove her worth one more time. "Admiral," she said quietly, "I can guarantee that if we don't try, that submarine is going to become a radioactive tomb in 6 hours. And when it does, Emma's world, everyone's world, will never be the same. Without waiting for permission, Rebecca began walking toward the exit. I'll need radiation gear, emergency protocols activated, and a direct line to this control room. And sir, she paused at the doorway. When this is over, we're going to have a very long conversation about how a 40-page safety analysis disappeared from official records. As she left the control room, Rebecca could hear Captain Delacroix's voice rising in angry protest. But she also heard Admiral Prescott's firm response. Captain, you're relieved of duty pending investigation. Dr. Brennan Morrison. Save that submarine. For the first time in 3 years, Rebecca Ann Morrison felt like Dr. Rebecca Ann Brennan again. And she had work to do. At 11:45 a.m., Rebecca stepped aboard the USS Nebraska, wearing a radiation suit that felt like a second skin, carrying tools she hadn't touched in 3 years, and knowledge that could either save thousands of lives or kill her in the process. The submarine's corridors were eerily quiet, except for the constant hum of failing cooling systems and the periodic wail of radiation alarms. She had exactly 4 hours before the reactor reached critical meltdown. Through her helmet comm, she could hear Admiral Prescott's voice from the control room. Dr. Brennan Morrison, radiation levels are climbing. You have maximum 30 minutes of safe exposure time. Understood, Admiral, Rebecca replied, making her way through the submarine's narrow passageways toward the reactor compartment. Every step took her deeper into a radiation field that was growing more dangerous by the minute. I'm approaching the primary control panel now. What she found in the reactor compartment confirmed her worst fears. The Aegis 7 system display showed a cascade of error messages, each one representing the software fighting against hardware that couldn't keep up. Temperature readings were fluctuating wildly. 842 degrees, then 856, then back down to 839, in the exact pattern she had predicted 3 years ago. Admiral, I'm seeing the oscillation pattern clearly now, Rebecca reported, her hands already moving across the control interface with practiced precision. The system is cycling through cooling commands faster than the mechanical pumps can respond. It's like trying to drive a car by stomping on the accelerator and brake simultaneously. Through the comm, she could hear Dr. Hartwell's voice. Rebecca, the radiation levels in your compartment just spiked to 400 rems per hour. You need to get out of there. Not yet, Rebecca said firmly, her fingers flying across the emergency override panel. I need to isolate the AEGIS 7 system without triggering automatic safety lockouts. If I do this wrong, the submarine's emergency protocols will engage and flood the reactor compartment with boron. That'll stop the meltdown, but it'll also render the submarine permanently inoperable. At 12:18 p.m., as Rebecca worked with intense focus, she heard a new voice over the comm, one that made her hands pause momentarily on the controls. Mommy? Emma's voice was tiny, frightened, coming through what sounded like a phone connection. Mrs. Patterson says you're at work doing something dangerous. Are you okay? Rebecca's heart clenched, but she forced her voice to remain calm. Hey, baby girl. Mommy's just fixing something important at work. I'm going to be fine, okay? I need you to be brave for me. Are you really a doctor, Mommy? Mrs. Patterson says you used to be a really important doctor before you cleaned buildings. Rebecca's eyes blurred with tears behind her radiation mask. Yes, sweetheart. Mommy used to help keep people safe, and today I'm doing that again. I love you so much, Emma. I love you too, Mommy. Please come home. The connection ended, and Rebecca wiped her eyes with the back of her gloved hand. Admiral Prescott's voice came through immediately. Dr. Brennan Morrison, we thought you'd want to hear from your daughter. Now please, Get that reactor under control and get out of there alive." At 12:34 p.m., Rebecca found the critical junction she'd been looking for, the interface between the Aegis 7 software and the submarine's legacy cooling hardware. The solution was elegant in its simplicity, just as she'd outlined in her buried report 3 years ago. She needed to manually disconnect 3 specific relay circuits, forcing the system to revert to the older, slower control protocols that matched the hardware's capabilities. "Admiral, I'm beginning the isolation sequence now," she reported. "This should break the oscillation pattern and allow the cooling systems to stabilize." "Understood. All personnel are standing by." Rebecca's hands moved with surgical precision, isolating each circuit in the exact sequence she'd memorized years ago during emergency training. First relay. Disconnected. The temperature fluctuations immediately began to slow. Second relay. Disconnected. The oscillation pattern started breaking down. Third relay. Disconnected. The change was dramatic and immediate. The reactor temperature readings stopped their chaotic swings and began a steady, controlled descent. 845 degrees, 832 degrees, 819 degrees. The cooling pumps, finally free from contradictory commands, settled into their proper rhythm. "It's working!" Dr. Hartwell's voice crackled through the comm, filled with amazement and relief. "Reactor temperature is stabilizing. All cooling systems are responding normally." At 12:47 p.m., Rebecca emerged from the reactor compartment, her radiation suit's dosimeter showing exposure levels that would require monitoring but weren't immediately life-threatening. As she was helped out of the submarine, she could see crowds of personnel gathering on the dock. Word had spread throughout the base about the crisis and its resolution. Admiral Prescott was waiting for her at the gangway, flanked by Commander Chen and a group of senior officers. But what caught Rebecca's attention was the small figure running toward her across the dock. Emma, her dark hair flying behind her as she sprinted past security barriers. "Mommy!" Emma crashed into Rebecca's arms with such force that it nearly knocked her over. "You did it! Mrs. Patterson said you saved everyone?" Rebecca held her daughter tightly, feeling tears stream down her face. "I just did my job, baby girl." "The same job I always loved." Admiral Prescott approached them, his weathered face showing a mixture of relief and what looked like genuine remorse. "Dr. Brennan Morrison, on behalf of the United States Navy, I want to formally thank you for your service today. You prevented a catastrophe that could have had international consequences." "Thank you, Admiral," Rebecca replied, still holding Emma close. "But I didn't do this for recognition. I did it because it was the right thing to do." At 1:15 p.m., as the crisis wound down and normal operations resumed, Captain Delacroix was escorted from the base in handcuffs. Naval Criminal Investigative Service agents had discovered that he had not only buried Rebecca's safety analysis, but had actively falsified integration test results to accelerate the modernization program. The evidence Rebecca had referenced, the 40-page technical analysis, had been found hidden in classified archives, exactly as she'd described. Dr. Hartwell approached Rebecca as she was finally getting out of her radiation gear. "Rebecca, I owe you an apology, and I have a question. The Navy needs a new chief nuclear engineer for the Atlantic Fleet, someone with your expertise and integrity. Would you consider returning to service?" Rebecca looked down at Emma, who was clinging to her hand and wearing the biggest smile she'd seen in 3 years. "I appreciate the offer, Dr. Hartwell, but I need to think about it. 3 years ago, I lost everything for telling the truth. Today proved that sometimes the truth takes time to surface. Admiral Prescott stepped forward. Dr. Brennan Morrison, the Navy wronged you. We're prepared to offer full reinstatement with back pay, restoration of your security clearance, and a formal apology. Your personnel record will be corrected to reflect the truth about your departure. Rebecca felt a weight lifting from her shoulders that she hadn't even realized she'd been carrying. Admiral, I accept your apology. As for the rest, I'll need time to consider what's best for my family. As they walked away from the submarine dock, Emma looked up at her mother with shining eyes. Mommy, are you going to go back to being a doctor? Rebecca smiled, feeling truly free for the first time in 3 years. I never stopped being a doctor, Emma. I just had to remember that being smart and brave sometimes means standing up for what's right, even when it's hard. 3 months later, Dr. Rebecca Ann Brennan Morrison returned to the Navy as Director of Nuclear Safety, a new position created specifically to ensure that technical safety concerns would never again be buried for political or financial reasons. Her first official act was to establish the Morrison Protocol, a direct reporting system that allowed any engineer to raise safety concerns directly to the Secretary of the Navy, bypassing all intermediate command structures. On the wall of her new office at the Pentagon, Rebecca hung 2 items, her MIT diploma and a drawing Emma had made showing a stick figure in a white coat standing next to a submarine. The caption, written in 8-year-old handwriting, read, "My mommy saves the world." And in the end, that's exactly what she had done. Not just saved the world, but proved that the most dangerous people are those who know the truth and aren't afraid to speak it, even when no one wants to listen, even when it costs them everything. Because sometimes being right is worth the wait. The truth always surfaces. Sometimes it just takes a nuclear reactor to make people pay attention.